The neighbor said she was the perfect mother. She baked on Sundays, she ran the PTA, she never raised her voice. But on the night of October 14th, her children vanished without a trace. No signs of struggle, no broken locks, no goodbye notes, just 2 empty beds, and a mother who called the police at 3:17 a.m., sobbing, but not a single tear on her face. Never raised her voice, not in public, not at church, not even during the worst weeks of her divorce. She had a presence that made people lean in and smile without realizing it. A gentle presence, the kind that made neighbors trust her with their house keys and kids without hesitation. She was the woman people went to when they needed help organizing a bake sale or planning a school fundraiser. Everyone in the neighborhood knew Claire. Everyone liked her. She lived in a modest 2-story home tucked away at the end of Brookstone Lane, a quiet street in southern Georgia, where the loudest noise most days came from sprinklers or the distant hum of lawnmowers. She had 2 children, twins, Lily and Jonah, both 7 years old. From the moment they were born, Claire's life revolved around them. Lily was the creative one. She carried a spiral notebook everywhere she went and would draw animals she imagined from stories she read. Horses with wings, owls with 4 eyes, foxes with crowns. Jonah was different, more logical, more precise. He could tell the time from nearly any clock and loved anything mechanical. Toys with gears, watches, little puzzles. Together, they were Claire's whole world, and Claire in return made sure their world felt safe, predictable. Every morning at 7:30, breakfast was served. Always oatmeal and fruit. By 8 o'clock, she walked them to the school bus. After school, it was quiet reading time, then dinner by 6 o'clock. Every night at 8:30, she tucked them in with a story and a kiss on the forehead. The Marstons were a routine family, maybe even a little too perfect. After her husband Matthew left, Claire kept everything together. She never badmouthed him. In fact, she barely spoke about him at all. Most people assumed he was the one who walked away, but no one ever asked directly. That wasn't the kind of neighborhood where you pry. Claire always looked composed, her makeup neat, her hair tied back, her voice calm. But quietly, she was struggling. Financially, things had started slipping. She'd taken a part-time evening job cleaning offices, something she never talked about with anyone. She didn't want sympathy. She didn't want help. At school, the teachers started to notice the signs. Lily once fell asleep during story time. Jonah's shoes were a size too small. When the school offered free lunch support, Claire declined it. "She's proud," one teacher said later. "Too proud. She'd go hungry before letting anyone know she was struggling." Despite the stress, Claire made sure no one outside the walls of that house could ever tell. Her yard was always trimmed. Her home was spotless. Her smile was always ready. But behind closed doors, the pressure was mounting. Bills were overdue. The electricity had been shut off for a day in August. There were reports that Claire had begun taking melatonin to help her sleep, sometimes 2 or 3 pills at a time. The twins, though, remained the center of her world. Claire had even started homeschooling them part-time, pulling them out for religious study sessions in the afternoon. She told friends it was to help them learn more about God. She said she wanted to raise children who were pure in spirit, children untouched by the world's filth. Nobody thought twice about it. This was Claire, after all. Claire, who made handmade Easter cards for the entire block. Claire, who took meals to the elderly woman across the street. Claire, who once stayed up all night sewing costumes for the school play when the PTA ran out of money. But things were starting to crack. One neighbor, who lived directly across from Claire, would later say that something changed in the final weeks before the incident. She said Claire had started looking tired. Not just tired, hollow, like the light behind her eyes was flickering. She stopped coming to church, missed 2 PTA meetings in a row, and when asked, She said she was just focusing on her children right now. The last time anyone saw the twins was on October 13th. It was a Friday. Claire picked them up from the local library around 5 p.m. A security camera caught the footage. Claire in a gray sweater holding Jonah's hand. Lily was clutching a small book to her chest. The three of them walked out of frame. That night, Claire posted a Bible verse to her private Facebook page. Just one line. "He will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge." Then, at 3:17 a.m., she called 911. Her voice was steady, almost rehearsed. "My children are gone," she told the dispatcher. "I tucked them in. I woke up and they're not in their beds." When officers arrived, they found the front door locked. The back door was unlocked, but there were no signs of forced entry. No broken glass, no footprints outside, no fingerprints that didn't belong. The beds were made, their toothbrushes untouched, their clothes still folded. There was no sign of Lily or Jonah. Claire was sitting on the couch when the officers entered, not crying, just staring at the wall. She looked up and said, "I think someone took them while I was sleeping." What followed would become one of the most disturbing and confusing investigations in Georgia's history. A case that left detectives divided, a town shattered, and a courtroom gripped by a question no one could answer. Was Claire Marston a grieving mother or a cold, calculating woman hiding something darker than anyone could imagine? At 3:17 a.m., the 911 call came through. The voice on the other end was quiet, almost too quiet. A woman, calm but distant, as if she had already played this moment out in her head 100 times. "My children are gone," she said. The dispatcher asked her to repeat herself. "I tucked them in, I went to bed, and now they're gone." The caller identified herself as Claire Marston. She gave her address. She said there had been no sound, no struggle, no glass breaking. She had simply woken up at 3 in the morning and realized the house felt empty. When officers arrived just 8 minutes later, they found Claire sitting on the living room couch in a house that looked completely undisturbed. Her eyes were open wide, her hands folded in her lap. She was dressed in a robe and slippers. The lights were off. There were no signs of panic. She stood up when they entered and asked, "Did you find them?" The responding officer, a 10-year veteran of the force, would later testify that he found her composure unnerving. In most child abduction cases, parents are frantic, screaming, shaking. Claire was still. She led the officers up the stairs and into the children's bedroom. 2 twin beds, made neatly, a small nightlight still glowing. 2 backpacks leaned against the far wall, untouched. The closet doors were closed. The curtains were drawn. The beds were cold. The officers opened every closet, every drawer. They checked under the beds, behind the shower curtain, inside the garage. Nothing. No signs of struggle, no overturned furniture, no broken locks. The back door was found unlocked, but the lock itself wasn't damaged. The security latch was disengaged, but that didn't mean much in a house with kids. Claire told the police she had gone to bed around 10:30 p.m. She read from the Bible, took 2 melatonin pills, and fell asleep. She said she woke up with a feeling, walked to the children's room, and found it empty. She said she didn't hear anything unusual during the night. No car, no footsteps, nothing. The first theory the officers considered was a break-in. But without forced entry or witness reports, it seemed unlikely. There were no signs of tampering on any of the doors or windows. There were no security cameras on Claire's property. She had removed them the year prior due to privacy concerns. The second theory was a runaway, but these were 7-year-olds. It was the middle of the night. They had no history of running away, no known behavior problems. The door was too high for Jonah to unlock on his own, and Claire insisted she had checked every door and window before bed, like she always did. Within hours, the local police expanded the search. K-9 units were brought in. Drones flew over the nearby woods. Amber alerts were issued across the state. The media picked up a story by sunrise. 2 missing children, a quiet town, a loving mother who found their beds empty in the dead of night. Volunteers gathered at the local church. Flyers were printed. Photos of Lily and Jonah were plastered across telephone poles, gas stations, and Facebook timelines. The story was everywhere, but no trace of the children was found, not even a footprint. Neighbors began sharing what little they'd seen. One woman, living 2 doors down, said she thought she heard a door open sometime after midnight, but she couldn't be sure. Another said they saw Claire walking down her driveway the previous day holding a trash bag, but again, nothing suspicious. Security footage from surrounding houses was reviewed. One video showed Claire and the kids returning home from the library at 5:03 p.m. on October 13th. Another, taken at 7:48 p.m., showed the front porch light being turned off. After that, nothing. Between 8 p.m. and 3:17 a.m., the world went black. The police searched Claire's house in detail. They found nothing in the children's room, but in her bedroom, they discovered a small notebook. Inside were pages of prayers, verses, and what some described as doomsday-like passages. One line read, "The world is unclean. Their souls are too pure for it." Another simply read, "Soon." Detectives also found a small wooden cross under Claire's pillow. Etched on the back were the initials L and J, Lily and Jonah. By the second day of the investigation, the tone began to shift. Claire had not cried once, not publicly, not in front of officers, not even when shown pictures of her children. When questioned, she said, "I'm trying to stay strong. God is with them. I believe that." Some officers began to suspect she knew more than she was saying. Her calmness was no longer viewed as strength. It was starting to look like control. A search warrant was issued for her phone and laptop. Investigators found no calls made after 10 p.m. the night of the disappearance. But her browser history revealed something disturbing. In the week leading up to October 14th, Claire had searched for phrases like, "How much melatonin is too much for a child? How to help children sleep forever? Peaceful death verses." On October 12th, 2 days before the disappearance, she searched, "If no body is found, can you be charged with murder?" That same day, she purchased over-the-counter sleeping pills at a nearby pharmacy. She paid in cash. But even with this information, there was still no physical evidence. No blood, no fingerprints, no bodies. It wasn't until a third search of the home that investigators noticed something strange in the laundry room. A child's pillowcase, washed but faintly stained with something pink. Forensics later confirmed the presence of diphenhydramine, an antihistamine with sedative effects. Detectives began to consider a new theory. What if the children never left the house alive? What if Claire hadn't been a victim, but the one responsible? But without bodies, there was no way to prove it. No one had seen the children since Friday evening. No one had heard from them. No text messages, no calls, no sightings. It was as if Lily and Jonah had been erased. Still, Claire insisted she had nothing to do with it. She told detectives she believed someone came into the house and took them. She couldn't say who, she couldn't say how, but she was sure of it. She said she felt it in her soul. By the end of the week, the town was split. Some still believed Claire was a grieving mother. Others began to wonder if she had committed the unthinkable. But one question echoed louder than the rest. If Claire Marston didn't take her children's lives, then where were they? By the 6th day of the investigation, the case of Lily and Jonah Marston had stopped being a missing person search. It had become a mystery. And Claire Marston, once the grieving mother, was now its center. Detectives had no bodies, no confession, no eyewitnesses. But they had something else, silence. A deep, eerie silence from Claire, from the house, from the timeline. And that silence began to speak volumes. Investigators brought in Claire for a formal interview. It was her third time speaking with police, but this time the tone had changed. The questions were sharper, the pauses longer. Claire sat across from the lead detective, hands folded in her lap, her voice steady. "I understand why you're asking these things," she said, "but I would never hurt my children." She was polite, respectful, cooperative, but vague. When asked what time she had fallen asleep, she said around 10 or 10:30. When asked if she heard anything strange, she replied, "I don't think so." When asked who might want to take her children, she said, "No one that I know." The interview lasted 2 hours. Claire never lost her composure. She never asked for a lawyer. She never cried. But something didn't sit right with the detectives. As the lead investigator later described it, it was like talking to a mirror. Everything you said just came back calm, flat, and empty. Outside the interview room, the search continued. Officers combed through local parks, drainage ditches, abandoned lots. Search teams expanded the radius to 20 miles. Bloodhounds were brought in. Helicopters scanned the woods near the Marston home. Still nothing. Investigators returned to the house for a fourth time. This time, they looked deeper. They tore up carpet, removed drywall, pulled out sections of plumbing. Forensics teams tested every surface, every fiber. In the crawl space beneath the house, they found a blanket, one of Jonah's. It had been stuffed into a plastic bin and covered with bags of old clothes. It smelled faintly of bleach. Inside the lining of Claire's car, hidden under the trunk mat, they found a child's sock, balled up and soaked in something sticky. Blood. It was a partial DNA match to Lily. That was the moment detectives knew. Even without bodies, this case was about to change. They reviewed the children's medical records. Both had been healthy, no history of illness, no psychological concerns. But Jonah had once been treated for drowsiness and nausea. Just 2 months earlier, Claire had told the doctor he had trouble sleeping. She said he often got up during the night and wandered. But when the doctor asked if she needed help managing it, Claire refused. She said she had it under control. Investigators then turned to Claire's recent behavior. They spoke with her coworkers, her pastor, her neighbors. One neighbor reported something strange. She said that 3 weeks before the disappearance, she saw Claire digging in her backyard at night. When asked about it, Claire said she was planting a tree. But when officers returned to check that spot, there was no tree, just disturbed earth, hastily covered. They dug. 2 feet down, they found nothing. No bones, no clothing, no physical evidence, just dirt. But the fact that she had lied, that was enough to raise alarm. Investigators began to suspect that Claire had carefully constructed a life around control. Control of her home, her children, her image. She didn't drink. She didn't date. She didn't socialize. Everything went through her. And when that control began to slip, when the bills piled up, when her kids grew older and more independent, when the world crept in, she may have made a choice. A desperate, irreversible choice. Detectives looked again at Lily's diary, recovered from under her bed. It had been dismissed at first as childish rambling, but now it read differently. One entry stood out. It said, "Mom says we're going to sleep and not wake up, but we won't be scared. She says we'll be angels." Another entry, written the day before they vanished, read, "I hope we can still have pancakes in heaven." These words haunted the investigators. The theory they now considered was deeply disturbing. Claire Marston didn't just hurt her children. She may have believed she was saving them. A form of psychological delusion called altruistic filicide. It's rare, often associated with mothers suffering from untreated depression or religious psychosis. The idea that a parent kills their children to protect them from the world. Suddenly, Claire's prayer journal looked less like devotion and more like a manifesto. Phrases like "prepare them for the Lord" and "clean souls must not be touched by dirt" were no longer comforting. They were frightening. Even her social media, sparse as it was, hinted at a growing obsession. Weeks before the disappearance, she had joined private Facebook groups about the end times. She commented on a post saying, "Children are too good for what's coming." The detectives knew they were close, but they still had no bodies. And without bodies, no murder charge would stick. They needed one more thing. So they checked the garbage pickup records for Brookstone Lane and discovered that Claire had stopped putting out her trash 2 days before the children went missing. When they asked her about it, she said, "I didn't have much waste that week." But when they searched the landfill where her neighborhood's trash would have gone, they found something else. A burned children's book. "Goodnight Moon," half charred, the name Jonah written on the inside cover. A doll's head, melted at the base, and a paper napkin, stained with what appeared to be blood, all found in a bag marked with Claire's house number. It wasn't definitive. It wasn't enough to prove murder. But it painted a picture of a mother who believed she was doing something merciful, a mother who in the dead of night may have drugged her children, laid them gently in their beds, and sent them to what she believed was a better place. And now, she was the only one who could tell the world where they went. But Claire wasn't talking. She refused to take a polygraph. She refused to meet with psychologists. She refused to speak further with police. And when the state finally moved to arrest her, not for murder, but for obstruction, child endangerment, and tampering with evidence, she went quietly. No tears, no resistance, just silence. The kind of silence that left everyone wondering, were Lily and Jonah really taken? Or were they sacrificed in the name of something far more terrifying than evil? Something that looked, on the surface, like love. By the time Claire Marston was arrested, public opinion had split into two bitter camps. Some believed she was a monster hiding behind a porcelain mask. Others believed she was being punished for staying calm in the face of tragedy. But the investigators, they weren't interested in opinion. They were hunting for facts, and they were about to find something that changed everything. After her arrest, a search warrant was granted for her personal storage unit on the outskirts of town. Claire had been renting it for 6 months, paying in cash. What the police found inside didn't confirm murder, but it painted a chilling picture. There were rows of labeled boxes, some filled with children's toys, others with photographs, school drawings, a collection of home videos on old mini-DV tapes. In one plastic container labeled L&J Final, inside it 2 small Bibles, a pair of pajamas, and handwritten letters. Letters addressed to her children. In one, Claire wrote, "I'm sorry you had to go this way, but the world is too loud, too fast, too cruel. I couldn't let it swallow you. I did this because I love you. One day, people will understand." In another, she said, "You will wake up in a better place, with angels and no pain. I know it's not what you wanted." But it was the only way. Investigators also found a prescription bottle with the label scratched off. Lab testing confirmed it contained Zolpidem, Ambien, a strong sedative not typically prescribed for children. There was only one fingerprint on the bottle, Claire's. Her lawyer tried to downplay it. He said she was grieving, that the letters were emotional outbursts, that the items were keepsakes, not evidence. But behind the scenes, a grand jury was being prepared. Still, one major problem remained: no bodies. Without Lily and Jonah, prosecutors couldn't move forward with a murder charge. They needed something else, something undeniable. That's when the forensics team went back to a detail they'd nearly overlooked: the area behind Claire's house. A narrow wooded path that led to an overgrown clearing. 10 minutes by foot, 5 if you knew the trail. There, Near a rotting log and a cluster of stones, cadaver dogs alerted twice. Digging began the next morning. What they found were not bodies. What they found were blood traces. Tiny, barely visible to the naked eye. On leaves, on soil, on the bark of a nearby tree. The blood was tested. It matched Lily. But still, no remains, no cause of death, no time of death, no definitive proof that either child had died. At this point, Claire was being held on multiple charges: tampering with evidence, obstruction, child endangerment, but not murder. The case was making national news. Cable networks debated it every night. Talk shows asked whether it was possible to grieve the wrong way. Online forums exploded with theories. Some said Claire had faked her children's deaths and given them to someone, that she had sold them, that they were alive and hidden. Others believed the children had been killed, but that Claire had convinced herself it was an act of mercy. Then came the audio. A forensic team recovered it from an old baby monitor Claire had kept in her bedroom. It had a recording function. It was years old, an analog device, but it still worked. The night of October 14th, it had captured a faint audio file between 2:38 and 3:10 a.m. There were clicks, a door creaking, a child whispering, and then Claire's voice. Not loud, not angry, just soft, almost loving. "It'll be peaceful," she said. "You'll see them again." Followed by silence. Then the sound of a lullaby being hummed. The audio was enough. It didn't prove death, but it proved intent. And so, on December 2nd, 7 weeks after the disappearance of Lily and Jonah Marston, Claire was charged with 2 counts of manslaughter. The courtroom was packed. Cameras lined the halls. Protesters outside held signs that read, "Justice for Lily and Jonah," and "Where are the children?" The trial began in early March. The prosecution painted Claire as a meticulous, calculated woman who had been unraveling in silence. They described how she researched sedatives, how she removed security cameras, how she lied about the tree in the backyard. They read the letters, played the audio, showed the burned book, the blood-stained sock. The defense tried a different route. They argued that Claire had suffered a psychotic break, that she had undiagnosed religious delusions fueled by isolation and stress, that her letters were fantasies, not confessions, that no one had seen a murder, that without bodies, the state was asking the jury to imagine their own crime. Claire never testified. She sat silently through every session, eyes downcast, hands still. But when the prosecution played the final recording, the lullaby, witnesses say she closed her eyes and smiled. The verdict came after 4 days of deliberation. Guilty. 2 counts involuntary manslaughter. Claire Marston was sentenced to 34 years in prison. She will be eligible for parole in 18. But the case didn't end there. Because even now, years later, there's one thing no one can answer. Where are Lily and Jonah? No remains were ever found. No bones, no clothing, no graves. Searches continued for months after the trial. Private investigators were hired. Journalists dug through every lead, every rumor, every possible sighting. Nothing. Some still believe the children are alive, hidden somewhere, raised under new names. Others believe Claire buried them so well, they'll never be found. And then there are those who believe something else entirely, that Claire never intended to kill them, that she truly believed she was rescuing them from life itself, a final act of twisted, silent love. The trial of Claire Marston was unlike anything the town had ever seen. People lined up outside the courthouse before sunrise, clutching coffee cups and cell phones, hoping to get a seat inside. Reporters from across the country swarmed the small Georgia town, turning it into a spectacle overnight. Inside the courtroom, the mood was tense. Some came seeking justice, others came looking for answers. But one thing united everyone in that room. They all wanted to know the same thing. Where were Lily and Jonah? The prosecution opened with a chilling message. This is not the story of a woman who lost her children, the lead prosecutor said. This is the story of a woman who made a choice, a quiet, planned, irreversible choice. They laid out everything they had, the browser history, the sedatives in the pillowcase, the burned book with Jonah's name, the blood traces behind the house, the audio recording recovered from the baby monitor, the one where Claire's voice could be heard whispering, "It'll be peaceful, you'll see them again." And perhaps most disturbing of all, the letters. Handwritten notes Claire had penned to her children in the weeks before they vanished, saying goodbye, apologizing, promising that what she was about to do was for their own good. Each piece of evidence on its own was disturbing, but together they told a story that was hard to deny. A story of a mother who, under the crushing weight of loneliness, fear, and religious delusion, believed she could save her children by ending their lives. The defense pushed back. They argued that Claire had no history of violence, no history of mental illness, and no direct proof of murder. They reminded the jury again and again that no bodies had been found, no cause of death, no crime scene. They claimed the letters were emotional expressions of grief, not confessions, that the audio was unclear, that the blood behind the house could have been from a past injury. They painted Claire as a deeply religious woman who had lost everything and was being punished for not falling apart in the way society expected. They even introduced a psychiatrist who testified that Claire likely suffered from a dissociative episode, an altered mental state in which reality becomes warped. The courtroom was quiet during that testimony, but no quieter than when the prosecution replayed the baby monitor recording. The lullaby, the whisper, the silence that followed. Claire never took the stand. Her lawyer said she didn't need to, that the state had failed to prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt. But it didn't matter. After 4 days of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict. Guilty. Not of first-degree murder, because there were no bodies, but guilty of 2 counts of involuntary manslaughter. The judge called Claire Marston's actions deliberate, chilling, and heartbreaking. She was sentenced to 34 years in prison, 17 years for each count, to be served consecutively. She would be eligible for parole in 18. When the sentence was read, Claire showed no visible emotion, no tears, no shaking. She simply bowed her head and whispered something no one could hear. Outside the courtroom, the town was divided. Some felt justice had been served. Others felt something was missing. Because while a mother was behind bars, the children were still missing. Search efforts didn't stop after the verdict. Private investigators were hired. Volunteers combed the woods, creeks, and fields around Brookstone Lane. Sonar scans were done in local lakes. Cadaver dogs were brought in again and again. But no new evidence ever emerged. No remains. No final resting place. Nothing. It was as if Lily and Jonah had been swallowed by the earth itself. In the months that followed, journalists dug deeper into Claire's past. They uncovered journal entries from her teenage years that hinted at depression. Teachers from high school described her as bright but withdrawn. A college roommate remembered Claire becoming obsessed with apocalyptic passages in scripture during her sophomore year. But none of it explained how a woman could go from baking birthday cakes to planning a quiet, merciful death. To this day, Claire Marston has not spoken publicly about what happened. Not in interviews, not in letters, not even to her own sister, who visited her once in prison, only to be met with silence. She just looked at me, her sister said, and she said, "They're safe now." That's all. And then she wouldn't say another word. There are some who still believe Louis and Jonah are alive, that Claire gave them to someone, that she orchestrated an elaborate vanishing act to save them from something, herself, the world, her own mind. Others believe they're gone, that they were sedated, that they died peacefully as Claire had planned, and that she buried them so deeply, so carefully, that they'll never be found. There's even a growing online movement, people who believe Claire is innocent, that she's been framed, that she's the victim of a broken system that punishes mothers for grieving too quietly, for breaking in the wrong way. But most people agree on one thing. Something terrible happened in that house. Something no mother should ever do, and something no child should ever experience. Today, the Marston home stands empty. The windows are boarded. The grass has overgrown. The neighborhood that once called Claire a perfect mother now avoids saying her name. But every now and then, a stranger will leave a flower on the doorstep. 2 flowers, one pink, one blue, and a note that simply reads, "We still remember."